When I woke up that sunny Saturday morning, I didn't expect chaos to unfold right on my front lawn. The smell of coffee still lingered in my kitchen when I heard voices, lots of them. I stepped outside and nearly dropped my mug. My yard was filled with folding tables, racks of clothes, boxes of random junk, and a bright pink sign that read Community Garage Sale hosted by Karen. The only problem, I never agreed to it. In fact, I didn't even know it was happening until half the neighborhood was already there. Karen, the self-proclaimed HOA president, stood proudly by my driveway, waving at shoppers like a queen at her parade. She had trespassed onto my property, set up her entire sale, and told everyone that I had volunteered to host it. When I confronted her, she just smirked and said, "Relax, it's for the community." My blood boiled. This woman had made my life miserable for months with constant complaints about my lawn, my paint color, even the way I parked. But this was the final straw. As I looked around, I noticed something interesting. Karen's shiny white SUV parked right at the edge of my driveway, blocking my garage. That's when the idea hit me. If she wanted to use my property without permission, maybe I'd return the favor. I grabbed my phone, took some pictures, and made a few calls. By the end of the day, Karen's garage sale wasn't the only thing missing from my yard. Her SUV was gone too, and what happened next turned our whole neighborhood upside down. The morning sun stretched lazily across Maplewood Lane, washing the quiet suburban street in a soft golden glow. One loved mornings like this: fresh air, chirping birds, the faint smell of dew clinging to my lawn. Saturdays were my peace days. I'd usually water the plants, brew a cup of coffee, and sit on my porch swing while the neighborhood slowly came to life. But that morning, peace was the last thing I got. It started with faint chatter, voices I didn't recognize. At first I thought maybe someone's kids were playing out front, but as I stepped outside with my mug in hand, the sight that greeted me made me freeze mid-step. My front yard looked like a flea market had exploded overnight. Folding tables lined the driveway. Cardboard boxes overflowed with clothes, toys, and dishes. A rack of dresses stood lopsided in the middle of my grass. There were posters taped to my mailbox, my fence, even my front gate. Bright pink letters read, "Community Garage Sale hosted by Karen." For a second I thought I was dreaming. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nope, still there. Strangers, actual strangers, were wandering across my property, browsing through items I'd never seen in my life. A little boy was trying on a bike helmet by my flower bed. A woman in sunglasses handed Karen a $5 bill for what looked like an old toaster. Karen, there she was, standing in my driveway with her trademark pastel blouse and oversized sunglasses, waving at neighbors like a celebrity. Her blonde hair shimmered in the sunlight, her lips painted the same shade of arrogance she wore every day. I could practically feel my blood pressure rise. "Karen," I called out, marching down the steps. "What the hell is going on here?" She turned, flashing her rehearsed smile. "Oh, good morning, dear. Isn't this exciting? The annual community garage sale. Everyone's loving it." "On my lawn," I demanded. "You didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me." Karen tilted her head with that patronizing expression she used whenever she thought she was being reasonable. "Oh, I sent out an HOA email last week. Didn't you read it?" "I read it," I snapped. "It said there might be a community sale this month. It didn't say you were using my property without permission." She gave a casual shrug. "Well, your house is right in the center of the neighborhood. It just made sense logistically. People can park easily. The traffic flow is smoother. You're welcome." "Really?" I nearly dropped my coffee. "You can't just go in. This is trespassing." "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, laughing softly. "It's just for one day. You'll survive. Besides, the HOA voted on it." "The HOA didn't vote on my yard," I shot back. "You don't have that authority." Karen waved her hand like she was swatting away a fly. "You always make things so difficult. It's for the community, okay? You're such a stickler for rules." Rules. The irony nearly made me choke. This was the same woman who once left a 6-page complaint in my mailbox because my trash bin was visible from the sidewalk for more than the allotted 6 minutes. She'll fine me $50 for having a garden hose coiled the wrong way. She even tried to tell me to repaint my shutters because the shade of blue was too vibrant for the neighborhood aesthetic. And now she was lecturing me about community spirit. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "You have exactly 5 minutes to move your things off my property." Karen's fake smile hardened. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said. "This is my yard, my driveway. Move your stuff now." Her lips twitched. "You can't seriously expect me to tear this down. The sale's already started. Look around. People are shopping. You'll ruin it for everyone." "I don't care," I said firmly. "You didn't ask permission. I'm not hosting this circus." Karen sighed dramatically and crossed her arms. "You know, this attitude is exactly why no one wants to deal with you in the HOA. You're always so negative." I clenched my fists. "Karen, I'm serious. Move your stuff or I'll call the police." Her eyes flickered, but she quickly recovered with a smirk. "You wouldn't dare." I turned and marched back into the house, fuming. The nerve of that woman. I looked out my front window, watching as people continued shopping like nothing was wrong. Karen stood confidently behind her tables, completely ignoring me. My peaceful morning had turned into a nightmare. I called the HOA office, but of course, no one answered. It was Saturday. I called the non-emergency police line next. The dispatcher was sympathetic but cautious. "If she's truly on your property without permission," the officer said, "you have the right to ask her to leave or remove her belongings. If she refuses, we can send someone out." That gave me some relief. I stepped back outside, armed with my phone recording video. Karen noticed immediately. "Oh, are you filming me now?" she said loudly, laughing for her audience. "Really? That's so unnecessary." "Say hi to the police," I replied. "They'll love this footage." Her smirk faltered, but she didn't back down. "You're being ridiculous. Just let the sale happen. It'll be over by 3. "No," I said flatly. "You've got 10 minutes. For the first time, her confidence wavered. She glanced at the people browsing, then back at me. "Fine. I'll start packing up after lunch." "Happy? Not even close," I said, walking past her. That's when I saw her shiny white SUV parked right at the edge of my driveway, completely blocking my garage. I stopped and stared at it. "Karen," I said slowly, "why is your car blocking my garage?" She barely looked up from her cash box. "Oh, I needed to unload the tables. I'll move it later, sweetie." That word burned like acid. I'd had enough. I took a deep breath and smiled politely. "Okay, Karen, have it your way." Then I walked back inside and called the police again. This time I explained that she had parked on private property and refused to move her vehicle. The officer confirmed that I had the legal right to have it towed since it was blocking access to my garage. I called a towing company next. They asked for proof, so I showed them my property line on the deed and sent a few photos. 20 minutes later, a big red tow truck rolled up, its engine humming like poetic justice. The driver hopped out and asked, "White SUV?" "That's the one," I said. "It's blocking my garage." He nodded and got to work. The sound of metal chains and hydraulic lifts filled the air. Karen was too busy arguing with a buyer over a $20 lamp to notice until her car's alarm went off. Her head snapped around. "What are you doing?" she screamed, running toward the tow truck. The driver looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, this vehicle's being removed for blocking private property. You can call the company to retrieve it." Karen's face turned scarlet. "You can't tow my car. This is my community, not your driveway," I said, holding up the tow authorization slip. "Enjoy your community service fee." She stood there speechless as the tow truck rolled away, her precious SUV disappearing down the street. The look on her face was worth every second of the morning's chaos. For once, the queen of the HOA had been dethroned and I had the rest of the day to enjoy the quiet she left behind. By the time Karen's SUV disappeared around the corner, the entire neighborhood had gone silent. The tow truck's rumbling faded into the distance, leaving behind nothing but stunned faces and the sound of birds chirping again, as if even nature had paused to watch the drama unfold. People stopped mid-conversation, clutching half-paid items in their hands. A few neighbors exchanged awkward glances. Some whispered. A kid dropped a toy car and muttered, "Whoa." Karen just stood there, frozen, her sunglasses slipping down her nose, her mouth open and closed like a fish gasping for air. I could almost hear her pride cracking like glass under pressure. Then it happened, the explosion. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the street. She stumped toward me, waving her arms. "You can't tow my car. That's illegal." I didn't even flinch. "Actually," I said calmly, "it's completely legal. It was on my property without permission, blocking my garage. The police already confirmed it." "That's nonsense," she snapped, jabbing her finger toward me. "You had no right at all. This is harassment." I sipped what was left of my coffee. It had gone cold, but the satisfaction was warm enough. "No, Karen, harassment is when someone trespasses onto another person's property, sets up tables, hosts a full-blown garage sale, and pretends it's all approved." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people quickly put down the items they were about to buy and backed away. Karen turned redder by the second, her fury now mixed with embarrassment. "You think you're so clever," she hissed. "I'm the HOA president. You can't treat me like this." "Oh, I think I just did," I replied. That sent her over the edge. She whipped out her phone and started dialing furiously. "I'm calling the police," she shouted. I shrugged. "Go ahead. They already know what's going on." When the officers arrived 15 minutes later, Karen ran to them like a victim in a soap opera. "Officer," she cried dramatically, waving her arms, "this man had my car stolen. He's unstable. He's harassing me." The two officers exchanged a look that said, "Here we go again." I recognized one of them. Officer Daniel's a calm, level-headed guy who'd been in our area for years. He gave me a small nod before turning to Karen. "Ma'am," he said patiently, "we've already received a call about this. The property owner had the right to have the vehicle towed. It was blocking his garage." Karen's jaw dropped. "You're taking his side. He's lying. This is my neighborhood event." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "On his property?" "Well," she stammered, "technically yes, but it's for the community. He's part of the The officer took a slow breath. Ma'am, you can't use private property for public events without the owner's consent, and you can't block a driveway. That's a city ordinance. Karen's confidence deflated like a balloon. Her voice dropped to a shrill whisper. So what am I supposed to do now? My car's gone. You can contact the towing company, Daniel said, handing her a card. Pay the release fee and pick it up from their impound lot. Karen's hand shook as she took the paper. This is ridiculous, she muttered. Completely ridiculous. I couldn't resist. You're right, I said. Hosting a sale on someone's property without asking is pretty ridiculous. Daniels gave me a subtle smirk but stayed professional. All right, folks, he called out to the crowd. Let's clear the area. The sale is over. Please return home. Slowly, one by one, people packed up their things and drifted away. Some avoided eye contact with Karen. Others whispered under their breath. Within minutes, my once invaded driveway was nearly empty except for the mess she'd left behind. Clothes, empty boxes, unsold junk. It looked like a yard sale hurricane had hit. Karen stood amid it all, clutching her phone and muttering to herself. I walked up beside her. Need a trash bag. She glared at me. You think this is funny? I think it's justice, I said evenly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a lawn to reclaim. She let out a bitter laugh. You'll regret this. I'm filing a formal HOA complaint against you. You'll be fined for interfering with a community event. Go ahead, I said, stepping back. Make sure to include the part where you trespassed and ran an unlicensed sale. I'm sure the board will love that. She opened her mouth to argue, but for once, no words came out. Instead, she stomped off, grabbed her boxes, and started angrily throwing them into the back of a neighbor's truck. Every thud of a cardboard box sounded like her pride collapsing further. After the last of her things were gone, I stood in the middle of my now empty yard. It was quiet again, peaceful. The air smelled like victory and a bit of burnt ego. Later that afternoon, I decided to clean up the leftover trash she hadn't bothered to take. As I swept my driveway, a few neighbors stopped by, people who had always avoided getting on Karen's bad side. One of them, Mrs. Jenkins from across the street, leaned over the fence. You know, she said in a low voice, I've waited years for someone to stand up to her. That woman thinks she runs this neighborhood. I smiled. I think she just got reminded she doesn't. Mrs. Jenkins chuckled. You did what we all wanted to do. Good for you. By evening, the news had spread faster than wildfire. Everyone knew Karen's car had been towed from my property. The neighborhood group chat was buzzing with messages, some in disbelief, others in applause. Screenshots were circulating of Karen's red-faced meltdown caught on video by someone down the street. The clip was already titled HOA Queen Loses Her Throne. I couldn't lie, it felt satisfying. Not because I liked drama, but because for once, someone had held her accountable. Karen had bullied, threatened, and fined neighbors for the smallest things. And now she was the one facing consequences. The next morning, as I drank my coffee again on the porch, I spotted Karen driving past in her SUV. She didn't wave, didn't look in my direction. Her face was tight, her posture stiff. For someone who loved attention, she suddenly wanted none. A part of me almost felt bad, but only for half a second that day. I received an official letter from the HOA. My stomach tensed when I saw the logo. But as I read it, I nearly laughed out loud. It wasn't a complaint, it was an apology. Apparently, multiple neighbors had reported Karen's unauthorized event, and the HOA board had decided to suspend her presidential privileges. Pending review. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note from the HOA secretary. Thank you for standing your ground. We've been meaning to deal with her for a while. I folded the letter, smiled, and slipped it into my drawer. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt normal, peaceful. But as I looked out the window later that week and saw Karen glaring at me from across the street, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over, because Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat quietly, and if I knew her at all, she was already plotting her next move. For a few blissful days, everything in Maplewood Lane was calm again. The lawns looked greener, the air felt lighter, and the street no longer buzzed with Karen's voice echoing through the cul-de-sac. I thought, maybe, just maybe, she'd learned her lesson. But if there's one thing I should have known by now, it's that Karen never surrenders. It started subtly. A few days after her HOA suspension, I noticed a folded piece of paper tucked into my mailbox. No envelope, no signature, just a printed note that read, "Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. You'll regret embarrassing me." I sighed and tossed it into the trash, assuming it was just another one of her petty tantrums. But soon, strange things began happening around my property. The next morning, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door. Violation: lawn maintenance required. Apparently, my grass was half an inch too long, and I was being reminded to comply with HOA regulations. The notice had Karen's handwriting all over it. Even though she wasn't supposed to be issuing fines anymore, I took a photo of it and sent it to the HOA board. Within an hour, I got a reply from the secretary. This notice was not authorized by the HOA. Please disregard. We'll handle it. That should have been the end of it. But Karen doubled down. The following afternoon, while I was working in my garage, a stranger knocked on my door. He wore a neon vest and held a clipboard. "You the homeowner?" he asked. Yeah, I said, wiping my hands. What's this about? I got a report about a pest issue, he said, glancing at his paper. Someone filed a complaint saying your property is infested with termites. I stared at him. What? That's ridiculous. I don't have termites, he shrugged. We just inspect. I can check the perimeter and give you a report. I let him look around, though I already knew who'd made that report. Sure enough, the inspection found nothing, but the embarrassment of having a pest control van parked in my driveway for half an hour wasn't lost on the neighbors, especially the ones who liked to gossip. When I saw Karen standing across the street, arms folded, pretending to water her plants while watching the whole scene, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. I walked over to her fence. You reported me for termites, didn't you? She didn't even blink. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. But if you do have termites, you really should handle that before they spread. You need to stop, I warned. This isn't going to end well for you. Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. Oh, I think it's only just beginning. That night, I found out exactly what she meant. At around 10 p.m. As I was locking up for the night, I heard faint noises from outside, footsteps, maybe, or rustling near the trash bins. I peeked through the blinds and caught a glimpse of someone crouching near my mailbox. I grabbed a flashlight, threw on my shoes, and stepped outside. Hey, I called out. The person jumped, bolting down the street. I shone my light just in time to catch a flash of blonde hair. Karen. I walked over to my mailbox and found it open, stuffed with flyers. But not just any flyers. These were copies of a fake letter she'd made, with my name printed at the top, accusing me of being verbally abusive to HOA members and hostile toward community values. She had even signed it with a fake HOA seal. My jaw tightened. This was no longer petty revenge. This was defamation. The next morning, I gathered every piece of evidence, the threatening note, the fake violation, the bogus pest report, the flyers, and marched straight to the HOA office. The secretary, Mrs. Patel, listened with growing disbelief as I laid everything on the table. She's still doing this, she muttered, shaking her head. After being suspended, she's escalating, I said. She's trying to ruin me. Mrs. Patel sighed and rubbed her temples. I'll bring this to the board immediately, and I'll contact the HOA's attorney. This crosses several legal lines. I thanked her and went home feeling a little relieved, but I knew Karen wouldn't stop until she felt she'd won. Sure enough, by the weekend, she had a new plan. Saturday morning, I woke up to find a huge for sale sign planted in my front yard. Not mine. The sign had my address but listed Karen's phone number. Beneath it, in bold red letters, it said, "Motivated seller. Moving out soon. Call Karen." I stood there, mouth open, as a couple of curious neighbors walked by, reading it aloud. "Are you selling your house?" one of them asked. "No," I said, grinding my teeth. "Apparently, Karen thinks I am." I yanked the sign out of the ground and carried it across the street. Karen was trimming her rose bushes, humming like she didn't have a care in the world. "Nice sign," I said, dropping it onto her driveway. She glanced up with feigned innocence. "Oh my, someone must have made a mistake." "Cut it out," I said. "You're done playing games on my property." She stood, brushing off her gloves. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, had my car towed, and got me suspended from the HOA. Did you think I'd just let that go?" I met her glare with one of my own. "You brought that on yourself. I gave you every chance to do the right thing." Karen stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. "You don't get it. I am the HOA. I built this community. People respect me. You're just a troublemaker who thinks he can outsmart me." "Karen," I said quietly, "you're not respected. You're feared. And now, people are finally seeing who you really are." Her expression flickered just for a second before she turned and stormed back into her house, slamming the door. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that she wasn't finished. She was too proud to stop, too stubborn to back down. And sure enough, I was right again. That evening I received an email from the HOA's shared inbox. The subject line read, "Emergency HOA meeting concerning property misconduct." The message said I was required to attend and answer for my behavior. At first I thought it was real, but when I looked closer I noticed the sender's address, maplewoodboard@gmail.com, not the official one. It was a fake. She was trying to bait me. Again I sat back in my chair, half amused, half furious. Karen was spiraling, and the more she tried to destroy me, the more evidence she left behind. The funny thing was, I didn't even need to do anything. She was digging her own grave, one scheme at a time. By the end of that week, the HOA lawyer contacted me. They'd reviewed everything and were preparing formal action against her for harassment, defamation, and misuse of HOA authority. When I read that email, I smiled for the first time in days. Karen had declared war, but soon, she was going to lose everything she thought she controlled. A week passed, and the tension in Maplewood Lane thickened like summer humidity. You could feel it in the air, neighbors whispering, curtains shifting whenever I stepped outside, people pretending not to watch but clearly dying to know what would happen next. Everyone had seen Karen's meltdown. Everyone had heard about her fake letters and ridiculous revenge tactics. And now, everyone was waiting for the inevitable, the HOA hearing. The official notice came in a plain white envelope. Inside, a formal letter stated that Karen's actions would be reviewed at a special HOA disciplinary meeting. As the main complainant, I was required to attend. The date was Friday afternoon, held in the community center neutral ground, though everyone knew it was built with Karen's influence years ago. The morning of the hearing, I woke early, the sunlight spilling through my kitchen window. It should have been an ordinary day, but my stomach twisted like I was walking into a courtroom. I brewed coffee, rehearsed what I'd say, and gathered every piece of evidence. I had photos, screenshots, printed emails, even the fake flyers she'd made. I wanted to be prepared for whatever she tried to pull. By 2 p.m. I arrived at the community hall. Rows of plastic chairs lined the room. A long table at the front where the HOA board sat 5 members, including Mrs. Patel, who gave me a reassuring smile. And there, sitting 2 chairs away, was Karen, dressed in a white blazer, pearls gleaming, posture stiff and proud. She looked more like a lawyer than a neighbor facing suspension. Mr. Lawson, Mrs. Patel began, addressing me. Thank you for joining us. We're here today to review the conduct of HOA member and acting president, Mrs. Karen Price, following several complaints regarding unauthorized activities, defamation, and property misuse. Karen immediately interjected, her voice dripping with indignation. This entire proceeding is a witch hunt. I've served this community for 8 years, without a single issue until he moved in. She pointed at me like I was the villain in her drama. I stayed calm. With respect, I said evenly, this isn't about me. It's about what you did owned my property. She scoffed. Oh please. One little misunderstanding. And suddenly I'm public enemy number 1. Mrs. Patel cleared her throat. Mrs. Price, we've reviewed multiple reports, some from Mr. Lawson, others from your neighbors. This isn't an isolated incident. Karen's jaw tightened, but she forced a smile. You're basing this on gossip. Everyone knows I care more about this community than anyone else here. At that, a voice from the back spoke up. You mean you control this community more than anyone? It was Mr. Turner, a quiet neighbor who rarely spoke at meetings. A few people chuckled nervously. Karen glared at him, then turned back to the board. I have evidence too, she said, pulling a folder from her purse. Proof that Mr. Lawson has been targeting me, filming me without consent, spreading lies, and calling the police over trivial matters. I leaned back. You mean the time you hosted an illegal garage sale on my driveway? Yeah, I filmed that. The room murmured. Even the board members looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Patel adjusted her glasses. Let's stick to the facts, please, Mr. Lawson. You may present your evidence. I stood, opened my folder, and began laying everything out. This, I said, holding up a photo, was my yard on the morning of May 14th. Karen organized and hosted a garage sale without my knowledge or permission. Gasps echoed as I placed the next sheet, a screenshot of the community flyer labeled, hosted by Karen. Next, I continued. She parked her SUV in my driveway, blocking my garage, and refused to move it. When it was legally towed, she retaliated by posting fake HOA violations on my door and spreading false letters about me to other members. I handed around copies of the evidence, photos, and the fake letter she'd forged with the phony seal. The board members' eyes widened as they read. Mrs. Patel frowned. Mrs. Price, did you create or distribute these letters? Karen's face went pale for a fraction of a second before she recovered. I might have sent something similar as a warning, but I certainly didn't forge anything. I leaned forward. Your signature's right there. The room fell silent. You could practically hear her pride shattering piece by piece. Finally, one of the board members, Mr. Ellison, spoke. Karen, we've tolerated your behavior for years, your constant fines, your overreach, your intimidation. But this goes too far. You've abused your authority. Karen slammed her hand on the table. I built this HOA. Without me, this place would fall apart. Mrs. Patel met her glare calmly. Then maybe it's time we see if it can stand without you. There was a murmur of approval from the audience. I couldn't help but notice several neighbors nodding. Even the ones who used to fear her were finally finding courage. Karen's composure began to unravel. You're all ungrateful, she snapped. I've kept this neighborhood perfect. I've kept him in line. I couldn't resist. Actually, you've done the opposite. Her head whipped toward me. You think you've won? You think you're the hero here? You humiliated me. Karen, I said quietly, you humiliated yourself. All I did was refuse to let you walk all over me. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her lips trembled. Her hands, usually so perfectly manicured, shook against the table. Mrs. Patel cleared her throat again, signaling for order. The board has heard enough. We'll take a short recess to deliberate. They stepped outside for barely 5 minutes, though it felt like an hour. When they returned, Mrs. Patel read the verdict in a calm, measured tone. Effective immediately, she said. Karen Price is removed from her position as HOA president and suspended from all board activities for a period of 12 months. Furthermore, due to her repeated misuse of authority and personal harassment of residents, the HOA will be pursuing formal action to restrict her from issuing fines or notices without board approval. A stunned silence filled the room. Then, quietly at first, came the sound of clapping. Mrs. Jenkins started it. Then Mr. Turner, then nearly everyone else. Karen's face turned crimson. "This is absurd," she screamed over the applause. "You can't do this to me." "It's already done," Mrs. Patel said softly. Karen grabbed her purse, stood abruptly, and stormed out of the hall. The door slammed behind her so hard that one of the plastic chairs rattled. The meeting continued briefly, but most people were buzzing with relief. Neighbors came up to shake my hand, to thank me for finally standing up to her. For the first time in years, the atmosphere felt lighter, like the whole neighborhood had been freed from a spell. I walked home under the warm afternoon sun. I looked across the street at Karen's house. Her curtains were drawn, her car parked perfectly in the driveway. The queen of the HOA was dethroned, and though I should have felt triumphant, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over, because someone like Karen doesn't just disappear quietly. She plots. And deep down, I knew the calm after the storm was just the silence before her next move. The days following the HOA hearing felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time since I'd moved into Maplewood Lane, I could step outside without the weight of Karen's scrutiny pressing down on me. Neighbors waved when I passed by. A few even stopped to chat, something that had never happened before. It was like the neighborhood had woken up from a long nightmare, free from the control of its self-appointed queen. Karen's house, however, stood eerily quiet. Her curtains remained drawn, her yard perfectly manicured but lifeless. Every now and then I'd catch sight of her peeking through her blinds, watching the world she once ruled now move on without her. It should have felt satisfying, and in a way, it did, but there was also a strange emptiness to it. The drama had ended, yet part of me kept waiting for her to make one final move, and, as it turned out, she did. One Wednesday morning, about 2 weeks after her removal from the HOA, I found an envelope taped to my front door. My name was scrawled across it in her signature cursive handwriting. No return address, no threats, just my name. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You won, Lawson. Congratulations. You took everything from my title, my reputation, my respect. But I suppose I earned it. I let my pride blind me. I forgot what a community was supposed to be. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, Karen." I stood on the porch for a long time, the sunlight warming the page in my hands. It was the last thing I'd expected from her. An apology, a genuine one, or at least close enough. I didn't know if it was closure or manipulation, but something in her tone told me she finally realized how far she'd gone. Later that day, I saw a moving truck parked outside her house. Karen stood near the curb, directing the workers with a quiet, subdued expression. Gone was the confident smirk, the sharp tongue, the queenly air of authority. She looked tired, defeated even. I hesitated for a moment, then walked across the street. "Moving out?" I asked gently. She turned, clearly surprised I'd approached her. "Yes," she said after a pause. "My sister lives upstate. She offered me a place to stay for a while. I think it's time for a change." I nodded. "Probably for the best." Karen looked down, fiddling with her keys. "I know you think I'm a terrible person, and maybe I was. I got too used to being in charge. The HOA was the only thing that gave me purpose. I thought keeping everything perfect made me important. But I went too far, didn't I?" "You did," I said honestly, "but admitting it takes guts. That's something." She gave a small, tired smile. "You're kinder than I deserve. Most people would still be celebrating." "Trust me," I said, smirking slightly. "They already are." That made her laugh softly, maybe the first genuine laugh I'd ever heard from her. She extended her hand. "Truce." I shook it. "Truce." By evening, the moving truck was gone, and with it, Karen. Her house sat empty, a for sale sign already in the yard. The sunset bathed the street in gold, and for the first time in months, Maplewood Lane was truly peaceful. Weeks passed. The new HOA elections were held, and Mrs. Patel became president. Under her, things were calmer, friendlier. Neighbors helped one another instead of reporting each other. The sense of community that Karen had once claimed to protect had finally become real, only after she was gone. One afternoon, as I was mowing the lawn, Mrs. Jenkins from across the street waved at me. "You know," she called out, "you should have recorded all this. Would have gone viral." I laughed. "Trust me, it's been wild enough living it." But later that night, sitting on my porch under the soft orange glow of the streetlights, I thought about everything that had happened: the invasion of my yard, the towing of her SUV, the revenge, the lies, the hearing, and finally, the apology. It was insane, exhausting, and at times infuriating, but it also taught me something. Karen wasn't born a villain. She was someone who craved control because she feared losing relevance. And when that control was taken away, she unraveled. I realized that sometimes people like her don't need punishment, they need perspective. Life gave her that lesson, harsh as it was. I smiled, sipping my coffee as the wind rustled through the trees. Peace wasn't just the absence of chaos, it was the decision to stop letting other people's chaos dictate your happiness. A few months later, a new family moved into Karen's old house, a young couple with a little girl who rode her bike up and down the sidewalk, laughing freely. The neighborhood welcomed them with open arms. Even I baked cookies, something I'd never done before moving here. As the seasons changed, so did Maplewood Lane. The lawns stayed green, the air stayed calm, and for once, there were no angry notes or fake violations taped to anyone's door. I'd finally found the peace I'd wanted all along. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd catch myself glancing at the empty house across the street, half expecting to see Karen's silhouette behind the curtain. Maybe she was out there somewhere, rebuilding her life, learning from her mistakes. I hoped so. Everyone deserves a second chance, just not a second presidency. Looking back, I realized that the whole ordeal wasn't just about a garage sale or an SUV. It was about boundaries, personal, emotional, and moral, and about what happens when someone decides to finally stand up and say, enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I leaned back on my porch chair and smiled. Maplewood Lane had survived the storm, and so had I. Sometimes, peace doesn't come when you win, it comes when you let go, and that was the final lesson Karen ever taught me.